Something is shifting in your life right now and you cannot fully explain it. Not dramatically, not in a way that will make a clear testimony yet, but something beneath the surface has changed and you feel it before you can see it. A restlessness where there used to be peace, a hunger that familiar things no longer satisfy, a sense that the season you are in is ending and what comes next has not yet announced itself clearly enough for you to name it. And instead of feeling like a sign of progress, it feels like confusion, because the disruption you are experiencing does not look like blessing. It looks like things falling apart, doors closing, relationships shifting, plans that used to work no longer working, a silence from God that is louder than any answer he has given you. And the question underneath all of it, the one you may not have said out loud, but that has been sitting with you through the quiet moments, is this: is God punishing me, or is he preparing me? I want to answer that question today, and I want to answer it specifically, not with general encouragement, not with the kind of comfort that sounds true in a service but evaporates by Monday morning, but with 8 specific signs from scripture that, if they are present in your life right now, are evidence of one thing: God is not done with you. He is not punishing you. He is doing something in you that the blessing he is about to release requires, and that process always looks a certain way before it produces what it was sent to produce. If you are in that process right now, this word is for you. Stay with me. The first sign is one of the most disorienting because it does not feel like a sign of progress. It feels like failure. The strategies that used to produce results are suddenly ineffective. The doors that used to open with a knock are now closed entirely. The relationships, the income streams, the routines that sustained a previous season of your life, they are drying up, and you are trying everything you know to reverse it, and nothing is working. 1 Kings 17, Elijah is at the brook Cherith. God has placed him there. God has been feeding him there supernaturally through ravens with bread and meat every morning and every evening. The provision is miraculous. The location is God-given. The assignment is clear. And then the brook dries up. Not because Elijah sinned, not because God changed his mind about him, not because the brook was wrong to begin with. The brook dried up because the brook was a provision for a specific season, and the season was over. And the only way Elijah would have moved to the next assignment, to Zarephath, to the widow, to the next stage of what God was doing through him, was if the brook stopped. If the brook had stayed full, Elijah would have stayed put, and the things God needed him to do in the next chapter would have gone undone, not because Elijah was unwilling, but because he was comfortable, provided for, settled in a season that God was ready to close. When things dry up in your life, when the provision that sustained a previous season suddenly stops flowing, the question is not what did I do wrong. The question is, where is God sending me next? The drying up is not punishment. It is direction. It is God removing the comfort of the familiar so that you move toward the assignment of the new. And the measure of your trust in this moment is whether you will wait for the next instruction or whether you will spend your energy trying to revive a brook that God already closed. Let it dry and listen for where he is sending you next. There is a specific kind of loneliness that belongs to the transition season, and it is different from the loneliness that comes from rejection or loss. It is the loneliness of a person who is still surrounded by people but who feels increasingly disconnected from them. The conversations that used to energize you now feel shallow. The environments that used to feel like home now feel like a wrong fit. The people you used to share everything with, you find yourself holding back, not from bitterness, but because what God is doing in you has not yet found its language, and you cannot fully explain it to someone who is not in the same season. This isolation is not accidental. Luke 5 verse 16. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Often. Not occasionally. Not when the schedule allowed. Often. The Son of God, who had 12 disciples, who was surrounded by thousands of followers, who could have had human company at every moment, chose to withdraw to lonely places. Not because the people were a problem, because there were things the Father needed to say that could only be heard in the quiet. God isolates you before he elevates you, not to punish you with loneliness, to protect the process from the noise that community can introduce before the thing is ready to be shared. There are revelations that cannot come in a crowd. There are instructions that can only land in the absence of competing voices. There are things God needs to tell you about who you are and where you are going that require the volume of everything else to drop before they can be heard clearly. The isolation is the classroom, and the lesson being taught in it is one that you cannot receive secondhand. You have to be alone enough, still enough, present enough with God to receive it directly. Do not rush out of the solitude. Do not fill the quiet with noise because the quiet feels uncomfortable. Sit in it, because what God is speaking to you in the lonely place is the specific instruction your next chapter requires, and you cannot afford to miss it because you were too busy filling the silence with distraction. This sign requires the most careful handling because it is the one most likely to be misread as evidence of something going wrong rather than something going right. If you are suddenly facing an increase in opposition temptations that you thought you had moved past resurfacing, financial pressure arriving from unexpected directions, emotional battles that feel disproportionate to your current circumstances, doubts about your calling that are louder than they have ever been, I want to say something to you directly. The enemy does not waste resources on people who are not a threat. He is strategic. He is not impulsive. He does not expend effort on a life that is heading nowhere significant. If you are under intensified attack, the intensification itself is information. It tells you that somewhere in the unseen realm, the size of your assignment has been recognized by the opposition even before you have fully recognized it yourself. 1 Peter 5 verse 8. Your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. A lion does not hunt randomly. It selects its target based on what is worth hunting. It positions itself most carefully around the prey that represents the greatest opportunity. And the intensity of the attack on your life right now is proportional in the spiritual economy to the weight of what is on the other side of this season. The greater the resistance, the greater the assignment it is resisting. This does not mean you endure the warfare passively. Ephesians 6 calls you to put on the full armor of God actively, deliberately, with the full awareness that you are in a real battle that requires real spiritual engagement. Stand firm, pray with persistence, guard your mind against the lies the warfare is designed to plant. But do not interpret the intensity of the battle as evidence that God has abandoned the assignment. Interpret it as evidence that the assignment is significant enough to be worth fighting for. And fight from that understanding, not from fear, but from the settled conviction of a person who knows what they are carrying is worth defending. This one carries real grief, and I want to honor that before I explain it. The disappointment of people you trusted, the friend who distanced without explanation, the mentor who withdrew at the moment their guidance was most needed, the community that did not show up the way you expected. These losses are real. They cause something, and treating them as merely theological data points before the grief has been honored is not wisdom. You are allowed to feel this, and then when the grief has been honored, I want to show you what is happening in the spiritual economy of your transition. John 15 verse 2, every branch in me that bears no fruit he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will bear even more fruit. Pruning is not punishment. Pruning is the specific, deliberate removal of what, though it was once part of the tree, is now consuming resources that the next season of fruitfulness requires. The prune branch is not removed because it was wrong to be there. It is removed because the tree has reached a stage of growth that the branch is no longer serving, and its presence is actually limiting what the remaining branches can produce. God prunes your circle before he promotes your calling. Not because the people he removes are bad people, not because the relationships were false, but because not everyone who was assigned to walk with you through the previous season was assigned to walk with you through the next one. And the grace for the next season requires space, relational, emotional, spiritual space that can only be created by the departure of what the previous season needed, but the next one does not. There is something else I want you to see in this. Genesis 50 verse 20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. The betrayal that Joseph experienced, being sold by his own brothers, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, forgotten by the cupbearer, was not a series of random failures in God's plan. Every departure, every betrayal, every disappointment was a navigational event moving Joseph one painful step at a time toward the specific location and position where the blessing God had spoken over him could be received. The people who left God saw them leave. The disappointment you experienced, God recorded it, and he is doing what he always does, working all things together, including the painful things, toward a good that you cannot yet see from inside the process, but that will be undeniable once you are standing on the other side of it. Let the pruning happen. Grieve what needs to be grieved, and then trust the gardener who knows exactly what the next season of your fruitfulness requires, and who has never made a pruning decision that he did not intend to produce more fruit than what was removed. There is a version of faith that operates comfortably within the visible, that trusts God when the evidence is available, that believes when the outcome is already partially in view, that prays with expectation when the door is already partially open. And then there is the faith that God is building in you right now. Hebrews 11 verse 1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Substance, evidence. These are words of certainty, but applied to things that are not yet visible. The substance is real before the manifestation arrives. The evidence is present before the outcome is visible. Faith is not wishful thinking about a possible future. It is the concrete, weight-bearing conviction of a promise that is already real in the spirit before it is real in the natural. And this kind of faith cannot be developed in comfort. It can only be developed in the situations that require it. The situations where the visible evidence is absent, where the provision has not yet arrived, where the next step is not yet clear, where the only thing holding you in position is the word that was spoken over you and the God who spoke it. Matthew 14, Peter stepping out of the boat toward Jesus on the water. There was no platform beneath his feet. When he climbed over the side of the boat, there was no supernatural surface visible from where he stood. There was only the instruction of Jesus, come, and the choice of whether to trust the word more than the physics. He stepped out. He walked on water until he looked at the waves, and then he began to sink. But I want you to notice something that most people overlook in that story. Peter walked on water before he sank, before the doubt took over, before Jesus had to reach out his hand. Peter walked on water, which means the faith was real. The miracle was real. The walking was real. The problem was not that the faith was insufficient. It was that the faith was interrupted by a shift in focus. The situations God is allowing in your life right now that require you to trust beyond what is visible, they are not designed to sink you. They are designed to produce in you the specific quality of faith that walks on water, that sustains your forward movement in the absence of visible ground, that does not require the evidence before it will believe. The stretching is not cruelty. It is training. And what is being trained in you right now is the faith that the assignment God is about to release requires, because that assignment will demand a version of you who can trust when nothing is visible, move when nothing is certain, and stand when everything around you is shifting. This sign is perhaps the most personally demanding, because what God asks you to release is almost never something obviously wrong. If he was asking you to release something that was clearly sinful, the obedience would be costly, but the logic would be clear. But the things God asks you to release in transition seasons are usually things that were genuinely good things, that serve aerial purpose in a previous season. The things you built and prayed over and invested in and legitimately received as part of his provision, that he is now asking you to lay down so that the next thing can be received. Genesis 22, God asked Abraham to offer Isaac on the altar, not Ishmael, the child of Abraham's impatience and self-effort, who had already been sent away. Isaac, the child of the promise, the one who was supposed to be the fulfillment of everything God had spoken, the one who, if offered, seemed to make the promise itself impossible. And God asked for him, not because God intended to take Isaac, the ram in the thicket was already there, but because God needed to know and Abraham needed to demonstrate whether the gift had become more important than the giver, whether the promise had become more precious than the promiser, whether Abraham's hands were open enough to receive what God was about to do, or whether they were closed around what he had already done. What is God asking you to release right now? Not the obviously wrong thing, the Isaac thing, the thing you prayed for, the thing that feels like it is part of the promise, the thing that if you lay it down seems to make the future impossible. Matthew 6 verse 33, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. All these things added to you, not instead of the kingdom, as the fruit of it. The promise is not that you will receive nothing. The promise is that when the kingdom is first, when the giver is genuinely more central than the gift, what God adds to that life is unhindered by the attachment that was limiting the flow. Release the Isaac, not because he was wrong, because God has a ram in the thicket and he cannot place it in hands that are already full of what he gave you last season. I want to shift now, because the first 6 signs have been largely about what is being removed, what is being tested, what is being stretched. And I want to show you the other side of the transition, what God is sending in. Even as things are being removed, when God is about to shift you into a new season, he begins to send people. Not the people you expected, not the connections you were trying to engineer through your own networking and strategy. Unexpected people in unexpected places, through unexpected circumstances, who carry a specific piece of what the next season requires. Acts chapter 9, Paul's conversion on the Damascus road is dramatic and visible, but the next move God makes is quiet and specific. He sends Ananias, a relatively unknown disciple, someone Paul had never met, someone with legitimate reasons to be afraid of Paul, to lay hands on him and restore his sight and introduce him to the community he would spend the rest of his life building. The most significant person in Paul's transition was not a famous apostle. It was an ordinary man whom God assigned to a specific moment. Divine connections rarely look the way we imagine them. They are sometimes the person at the event you almost did not attend, the conversation that started casually and ended with something significant being said that you could not have manufactured. The introduction from a mutual friend that seemed incidental but opened a door you had been praying about for years. The name that came to your mind during prayer with no obvious logical connection to what you were asking for, that turned out to be exactly the right person for exactly the right moment. Pay attention to the unexpected connections. God is not random in who he sends. Every divine connection in a transition season is specific, carrying a specific resource, a specific confirmation, a specific piece of the next chapter that you could not have accessed alone. And the people who miss these connections are almost always the ones who were waiting for something more impressive, who overlooked the Ananias because they were expecting an apostle. Stay alert. Be genuinely present in every room you are placed in, and trust that the person God sends to carry the next piece of your story may arrive in the last packaging you expected. This last sign is the quietest, and it is the one I want to land on because I believe it is the most important. Underneath all the disruption, all the drying up, all the isolation and the warfare and the testing, there is something else present. Something that does not fit neatly alongside the difficulty. Something that you might dismiss as wishful thinking, except that it keeps returning, keeps surfacing, keeps pressing against the inside of your chest. In moments when the logic of your circumstances says it should not be there, a sense that something is coming, not the fake hope that things will eventually improve, something more specific than that. A quiet, persistent conviction in your spirit that the current season is pregnant with something that has not yet been born, but that is unmistakably present. That the wait has a destination, that the process has an outcome, that what God began when he called you has not been abandoned and is in fact closer than the evidence of your current circumstances suggests. Romans 8 verse 19, for the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Eager expectation. The word in the original Greek is apokaradokia, a word that literally describes a posture of stretching the neck forward, straining to see what is coming, leaning toward the horizon in anticipation of something that is not yet visible, but whose arrival is certain. That expectancy in your spirit is not wishful thinking. It is your spirit responding to what is already in motion in the unseen realm. It is the inner man picking up on what God is doing before the outer circumstances have caught up to what the spirit already senses is true. The same way a woman's body begins preparing for a child, before the child is fully formed, before anyone can see evidence from the outside, your spirit is already responding to what God has already released in the spirit, and that response is the expectancy you feel. Do not dismiss it. Do not explain it away with the logic of your circumstances. Do not allow the difficulty of the current season to drown out the quiet conviction that something is coming, because that conviction is one of the most reliable signs available to a believer that God is active in the unseen, preparing what the visible world has not yet been told to expect. Feed the expectancy. Return to the word that was spoken over you, the promise, the prophetic confirmation, the scripture that lodged in your spirit and has never fully left, even when everything else shifted. Rehearse the faithfulness of God, not abstractly but specifically in your own history. The moments where what seemed impossible became undeniable. And let that rehearsal strengthen the expectancy until it becomes the primary lens through which you are reading your current season. Not the circumstances, not the silence, not the disruption, but the deep spirit-born certainty that the God who promised is also faithful. 8 signs, and if you are honest, most of them sound less like signs of imminent blessing and more like signs of a very hard season. That is the point. The preparation process is not designed to feel like the blessing. If it felt like the blessing, it would not be preparing you for it. It would be a pale imitation of it. The process is designed to produce in you what the blessing requires: the character, the faith, the dependence, the relational clarity, the spiritual sensitivity, none of which can be produced in comfort. All of which can only be forged in exactly the kind of season you are in right now. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. I know the plans. Not I am working on the plans. Not I am still deciding. Not the plans depend on how you handle this season. I know the plans. They are already formed, already intentional, already oriented toward your welfare and not your harm, already aimed at a future and a hope that is more specific than you realize and more certain than your circumstances suggest. The disruption is not the destination. The isolation is not the end. The warfare is not the verdict. The drying up is not the abandonment. The pruning is not the rejection. The stretching is not the breaking. And the release God is asking of you is not loss. It is the opening of your hands so that what he is preparing can be placed in them. Every sign in this video, every disruption, every discomfort, every departure, every demand is a fingerprint of a God who is moving, who has not forgotten what has spoke over your life, who is thorough rather than careless, deliberate rather than random, faithful rather than forgetful. Stay faithful in the process, not because you can see where it ends, but because you know who is running it. And he has never started something in a life he was not committed to completing. Philippians 1 verse 6. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. He began it. He is carrying it. He will complete it. Not might will. Your breakthrough is not in question. Only the timing, and the timing is in hands far more capable than yours. Trust the process. Stay expectant and keep moving forward, because what God has prepared for you is on the other side of the very season you are in right now.